just dying.
Hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre, and our guest today is Mike Watson, who is not a stranger to Second Life. He's been here before. Last time he was here with his magnificent book, The Meaning of Mark Fisher. That's why I'm still sitting here on the Mark Fisher bed, capitalist realism bedspread. Now, Mike, founded a new publishing company, a small publishing house with Dan Mello. It's called Revol Press. And they have a few titles. They have two titles which I believe are almost out, and a whole bunch of others slated for publishing to get us started, to get a feel for what this new publishing venture is going to present us. We'll have Shyla read from Mike's forthcoming book, Hungry Ghosts in the Machine, Addiction, Digital Capitalism, and the Search for Self. Take it away, Shyla.
Society has become addicted to the temporary relief that ignorance brings. One of the principal modalities of this addiction is nostalgia. In Mad Men, Season 1, Episode 13, advertising man Don Draper pitches Kodak's famous carousel slide projector. Draper says, "My first job, I was in-house at a fur company, and the sole pro copywriter, Teddy, told me the most important idea in advertising is new. It creates an itch, and you simply put your product in there as a kind of calamine lotion." But he also talked about a deeper bond with the product, nostalgia. It's delicate, but potent. Today, over 60 years after the episode was set, and in an age of hyper-contemporaneity, we are fully yet hopelessly aware of Draper's premise that nostalgia is a driving force that propels people forward, albeit in an aimless, cyclical manner. Mad Men is itself like a fairground carousel. Each episode was alcohol-tinged and adultery-fueled. It is unsurprising that Mad Men's considerable viewership was nostalgic for an era of willful disregard for consequence.
Thank you, Shyla. That's Shyla the Super Gecko reading from Mike Watson's Hungry Ghosts in the Machine, Addiction, Digital Capitalism, and the Search for Self. And I want to welcome back to Second Life, Mike Watson. Mike, how are you?
Hey, hi, yeah, I'm good. And thanks for that reading. That was really a great reading.
Now, the book is amazing. It's a concise book. It's like 56 pages. And I'm really, really impressed how much you put in there and how clear everything is. Can you, in a nutshell, tell the audience what is the book about? What was your attempt to convey here?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I guess probably important to say it's probably coming in about 100 pages of a book, but yeah, 50 something pages in A4, yeah. But still a slim volume for sure, yeah. So the book basically explores addiction specifically in our era, which I consider to be an era of digital capitalism, but it's not specifically about digital addiction, as there's been a number of books on what it means to be addicted to, to social media, for example. That's certainly significant, but it's more generally about the way we're all addicted in today's society, whether to social media or to consumerism in other forms, or to drugs or alcohol, etc. And it deals with what's behind that addiction, which is principally an insecurity that we have on the individual level, which is driven by a kind of lack of community, or by the destruction of communities. and by our need to find ourselves in the sense that, you know, to be ourselves, and also to constantly evade the kind of the perennial or unending fear of death, which does really, you know, characterize our experience of life, but which has been kind of overridden in the capitalist era, in that we, you know, we don't really get to think about or process our mortality, but it's not overridden in any actually useful way. It's just something that we're taught to ignore. We're taught, here, have another, you know, have another meme, have another drink, have another vape or whatever. So we don't really deal with our conditions in any healthy way. So I talk about the ways in which, you know, we approach this kind of lack of meaning and lack of any real interaction with our conditions, our existential conditions. I talk about how we approach that increasingly online in terms of you know, new age spiritualist trends that exist very much on Instagram, YouTube, etc. And I talk a bit about ego death, this idea of ego death, of getting rid of the ego, and this has been kind of another way of bypassing death, but it being ultimately not really fulfilling, in the sense that, right, you know, you can somebody like Teal Swan on YouTube. You know, Teal Swan is one of these awful you know, YouTube gurus. You know, she will say, you know, hey, you know, welcome to this episode. We're dealing with ego death, and you know, how to maximize your, you know, whatever. It's all very sales oriented. So the idea of ego death is kind of is co-opted by capitalism. So it becomes something that you obtain, that you buy, that you do as well as you can. It's kind of, it's competitive. So I talk about that. I talk about LSD and the kind of craze for psychedelia, which is a great thing, but it in itself doesn't really solve our problems either. So I kind of get to the end, and that we need to really work on community building, and we need to face our mortality head on and admit what we are. And that's really the main meaning of the book. And it says that, you know, all these things are useful. LSD culture, spirituality, you know, these things can certainly help redefine ourselves, and we need to redefine what we are at the moment, but only in conjunction with community. So we need to take these things and somehow take them outside and share them, you know, in a humane way.
This is what I really like, is that you're nuanced with this, and it's just a really solid sort of structural critique here, because a lot of people that I encounter on the left, they would just dismiss, for example, spirituality outright. But you very rightly say, you know, there's nothing inherently wrong with spirituality, or even astrology for that matter, but the way it's co-opted and commodified in digital capitalism, it is not you know, it's not going to cure you from this alienation and anxiety. And you mentioned ego death. I pulled this, Shyla prepared slides for us today, and I pulled this quote from this really terrible, you mentioned a different name, I already forgot, but this is Candace Vandell, and you quote her, and I looked her up, and it's just, oh my God. So she has some I don't know, sort of self-help with spiritual and self-realization thing. And the quote that you use, she says, "Hi guys, welcome to my channel. Today we're going to be talking about the ego death. What is that? Why is it mandatory to hit the next level? Watch this video." And I pulled this this screenshot of her where the caption, and I didn't plan this, but the caption says, "Let's talk about attention deficit, shall we?" So here is basically gamification built in to, again, to everything, and it's, I mean, it can't help, right? I mean, it's a hot and cold shower consistently. You're feeling alienated, and you're going to these channels to seek help or find a path to the self, and they just do the same sort of one-upping each other.
Yeah. I mean, it's really interesting, and even Michael Michael Pollan. I guess that's how
Oh,
you
that's
pronounce
right,
his name.
Michael Pollan, right. You mentioned him. Yeah, tell us
Famous
about Michael Pollan.
guy. I mean, he wrote a very famous book, didn't he, on psychedelia. He's been really instrumental in the reintroduction of psychedelia into the mainstream, and he gets a lot of flack because he is kind of so soft in a way. So for people who maybe want to see psychedelics used in a more radical way, kind of laugh at him because he's very much about the therapeutic settings. But I think that's a good thing. I think that, I actually say in the book that normie acceptance of psychedelia is something to be celebrated. And by normie, I mean the kind of normal person's acceptance of psychedelia is to be celebrated more for the kind of the effects of normal people on psychedelia than for the effects of psychedelia on normal people, if you see what I mean. There's this notion that we have to take psychedelia and make everyone crazy, and actually, I think psychedelia could be a great thing, but if used in a responsible way, and perhaps it's more that we need these people, in a medicalized setting, to say, hey, you can take these substances, LSD, shrooms, which have the same kind of base active substance anyway, so psilocybin. And we can go through some kind of sessions with people, introducing them to this slowly in a kind of responsible dose, and we can cure their depression for long periods of time before they need to come back and go through this again. And I think that's really a great thing. But what Pollan says on this Joe Rogan podcast is, he said with ego death, this kind of erasure of the ego through drugs or through meditation, he says you get a little break from the enforced habits of the ego. So there's this notion of getting a little break, so I'll get my ego death, I'll have a little break, before going back and posting to social media and going on Zoom, having a Zoom meeting at work. I'm going to have a little bit of ego death. And of course, it's something that's much more dramatic than that, or ought to be. It has its origins in 60s, 70s psychedelia, but really it has its origins in spirituality, going back, esoteric Christianity, Buddhism, Sufism. They all have these versions of an erasure of the self, and it can be a terrifying thing. I think if one is tripping, I don't do that kind of thing since a long time ago, but I think it's good if people want to do that. That you can have a really scary experience of losing your ego, and actually, it's not a thing of like, I just let go of my ego. It's often reported that people go through these terrifying experiences as if something in them is dying. Literally, it's a death of their self. And we do so much to protect ourselves, which actually are kind of, in a sense, false selves that have been provided to us through capitalism. But we do a lot to hold on to those. So anything that makes us let go of them is really scary. And that can be, again, through psychedelia, through meditation, through psychosis, through some other kind of intense physical illness where you have to confront, your mortality in a very real way. It's not a soft thing. It shouldn't be really a soft thing to be packaged and sold and talked about casually on podcasts. So there is this thing, that whatever we're doing, we're trying to avoid any real confrontation with death. So there's the fact of just ignoring our mortality most of the time. And then there's
go ahead.
There's capitalism in the way that capitalism makes us to a degree not alive, because it makes us into objects. In a sense, we're objects consumed by commodities. So there's that kind of lifelessness of capitalism, zombification, you could call it. But then there's the ego death, which is kind of another evasion, unless it's really done, in optimal conditions. So yeah, I think it needs, real care and attention. It's not like you get to choose your form of death or ignore it, because of course it's eventually coming anyway. And this is the thing, the book wasn't supposed to be really a book about death, so you can kind of see my mental state when I was writing it.
But I think that's important, because that's also what capitalism, and you're right about this, and that's what I really resonated with me. I mean, what capitalism does, and by the way, I said to a lot of my friends that you got to get this book, because I keep talking about David Foster Wallace's magnificent maximalist novel Infinite Jest, which I'm obsessed with. And I tell people now, Mike Watson basically wrote about the same themes that David Foster Wallace wrote about, but he did it in 56 pages. And so if if you can't be bothered with reading a novel that is 1,000 pages plus 300 pages of footnotes, pick up Mike's book. You talk about how capitalism is basically one of the pitches is that death can be avoided, right?
Sorry, you mean in the sense that I suggest it can be avoided, or that?
No, that capitalism is. Isn't that
Sorry.
that is the pitch? And I guess you are saying, like, if we don't come to terms with that, death actually is real, then we buy into the sales pitch of capitalism.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. I mean, capitalism. Yeah, it constantly kind of fills that void or plugs that hole that we don't want to confront, but never in a way that's really convincing. So it leaves us kind of looping around and constantly seeking more dopamine, which we'll get through objects or through drugs. Yeah. So I think in a sense, addiction is crucial to capitalism because it's kind of what lies at the root. So there's two things happening. There's we have capitalism because we're trying in a really ineffective way of dealing with our mortality. So it's already a kind of compulsion to avoid at all costs the reality of nature and nature's conditions.
Right. That's what and here's the quote. I just put up this quote that I pulled from your book. Surely death negation is life affirmation. And death negation, I mean, you can elaborate on this. Yet the need to avoid reminders of our vulnerability, which is constantly what we're doing and what addiction, I guess, is doing, avoiding the reminders of vulnerability and ultimately mortality is arguably one of the root causes of addiction and compulsive behavior. So I think this is important. Elaborate on what do you mean by death negation? Who is telling us to negate death, and how are we doing this? And I have a personal example of family friends who went to South America for a year. And they had this thing, and they had a YouTube channel, of course, Mike. That was maybe 5-6 years ago. And in the YouTube channel, in the first video, they said, "Hi guys, my name is XYZ, and this is my husband XYZ, and we have 2 wonderful kids, and we have great jobs, but we kind of feel empty inside. So we decided to take some time off to go to South America for a year with our truck and with our kids to find ourselves." And I know I throw everything together, but this was to me such a prime example of also kind of a performative way of flouting sort of this privilege that they could even do that. But yeah, talk a little bit about death negation and life affirmation. What do you mean by that?
Okay, this really comes from a consideration of Nietzsche, who's a hugely controversial character. You don't need telling that. No one needs telling that, I don't think. But I think there's so much in Nietzsche that is still useful, even taking into account his misogyny and apparent racism and other aspects. But that's a big debate, but we can't really go into. But I've been taking the useful aspects, or some of the useful aspects, and applying them. I mean, the thing where I talk about death negation is where Nietzsche says that ultimately we need to say yes to all things. And this is the thing where he's confronting systems of thought and spiritual practices which are really kind of negations of life. So the whole thing with Nietzsche being a nihilist, which you often hear, is actually he wasn't a nihilist. He wrote about nihilism, and he would say that it's the Christians who are the nihilists. And it's more problematic where he would also say the socialists are nihilists, but we won't go there. We'll just use the other bit where he says that the Christians are nihilists, But it's really interesting if you go into it, because in the Antichrist, which is his last word on this kind of area, where his whole career he's been deeply anti-Christian, he actually says that he has nothing against Christ, that Christ, had it all right, but that Christ was ultimately the only Christian, and that what came after Christ was kind of a twisting of his thinking, and basically he talks about what he calls Christ bearing on the cross, and when he says he's bearing on the cross, he means his kind of sense of calm on the cross and his acceptance of fate there. And this ties into Nietzsche's Superman, and what actually Nietzsche means by this Übermensch or Superman is, not this kind of like heroic kind of, like the film Superman, or, how you might imagine some man that goes beyond humanity, some kind of almost like you would say today like AI, but, or biologically enhanced kind of hero, which is hugely problematic, of course, and you can see how that could tie into eugenics and things. But he really means a human, would be better, a human able just to countenance reality and accept all things. Mm-hmm. And his ties also into his eternal recurrence, the idea that the whole of existence is going to repeat again and again eternally, which actually is for him is just arguably, there's good evidence for this, is just a kind of thought experiment. So at one point, going back to an earlier book, I think it was A Gay Science, he says, imagine that there's a kind of demon, and there's no reason for the demon, but he just introduced it this way: there's a demon, and the demon wants to tell you that your existence is going to repeat eternally. And he says, what would be the right question? What would be the right response to that demon? And he said, you should say to the demon, you should say, yes, this is a great thing. Basically, I'm paraphrasing, but he says that we should say yes to all things. That given the imagined fact of the eternal recurrence of our lives, if we can do nothing but keep repeating the exact life we have, the only choice we have, because that's the kind of worst case scenario, of course, for most people. The only choice we have is to then just decide to like it all, to accept it all. So Nietzsche says that's the kind of opposite of Christianity. Christianity is like, you shouldn't be doing that, you shouldn't be doing that. You should basically be denying your kind of innermost fundamental human instincts. So what I talk about during the book is how a lot of online practices are actually nihilistic in the sense that Nietzsche considers Christianity to be nihilistic, and the way in which we're on social media, we're maybe getting very kind of passionate on social media, very angry, but we're actually kind of tensed up in front of screens, not really moving much. Yeah. We become kind of empty husks, and that would be a kind of a deaf negation. So basically what I say, if Nietzsche's saying yes to all things, if this saying yes is life affirmative, then we might take saying no to all things as death negatory. So, you think, well, hang on, isn't death negatory life affirmative? So when Nietzsche is saying, just accept everything, then there's kind of no that you get on social media. Everybody is saying no to everyone else. So the kind of principle emotional social media is negatory. You might go, well, actually, in the sense of it's negatory of all things, it must be death negatory, and in fact that is the root of it, because if you consider, as the book argues, that the root of all our kind of ills is our inability to accept death, this projection of hatred onto everything else one experiences online is a negation of death. So you go, well, okay, well, why isn't the negation of death a celebration of life? Because if you're negating death, you are negating life. Because you have to have death to have life.
See, now I get it. Oh my God. And I pulled up this quote here. Let me just read this from the book. You kind of said it, but here this is the section of the book where you get into this, also the connection with Christianity. Life-denying processes as such are very much with us in the form of digital capitalism and its demands that we lifelessly produce and consume new media. So where the Christian in deep prayer in front of a religious icon assumes a position of stasis akin to the stillness of the dead matter that materially comprises the icon itself, the individual in front of their screen becomes less animated even than the data that entrances him or her. Now, I mean, this makes total sense to me. But now my question would be, are you suggesting, is the TLDR message then, Mike, that you give in your prescription to counter this malaise, to basically shut off the internet, go outside, smell the flowers, maybe smell the flowers in the graveyard, and tell yourself that it's going to be over anytime soon, and will that make us happy?
Yeah, hopefully we don't need a too long don't read with my book. It's slim like all my books.
Who
but,
knows?
yeah, okay,
Who knows, Mike? It's way longer than an Instagram post. Okay, let's be real.
It's an age we probably do need a too long don't read. Okay,
Yeah.
so we basically, I think we can't do away with the internet, and I don't think we should. And the internet is a great thing for anyone who remembers the pre-internet, which we do. I guess a few of you in the audience, certainly Draxtor and I, remember the pre-internet age. I mean, it's been so liberating. It's obviously been closed down fast. The rate at which there are more impediments on what you can do on Instagram and Facebook is frightening this year particularly, and coming up to the election. So I don't know what the internet's going to be like in 5 years. But one can express themselves in ways they couldn't. I used to make Xerox magazines in university in 1998, around then, with my friends. And I don't know what we would have made of this today if suddenly we were given these tools back then. It would have been the most amazing thing. That you can publish so easily and reach audiences. Reach such relatively large audiences, although that shouldn't be the aim. I'll get to that later. But it goes without saying that it's a great thing. But it's really dividing people, and it's really encouraging competition. So I have been associated with the online left, various different groups of people who they express left-wing politics online in different environments. So you end up with something called LeftTube, which is actually leftists on YouTube, or LeftBook, so leftist on Facebook, etc. So there aren't really many dedicated platforms, or there are a few more reasonable platforms than the Meta platforms, the Facebook platforms. But generally most of this is happening on the mainstream platforms owned by Meta, so Facebook, Instagram, and on Twitter. And the kind of form of the internet that we use, the format, encourages a high level of competition, even among people whose purpose is ostensibly to reduce competition and to spread community. But if you watch a lot of these people operating in this sphere, even if they're going with good intentions, they tend to become highly individualistic in their pursuit of more followers, of more Patreon supporters, of more likes, etc. So,
which is the capitalist paradigm. I mean, that's what the algorithm does. I mean, it's the internet as we face it today is, for the most part, owned by these large companies. Yeah.
I mean, it needn't be that way, and I think it's really on us in many ways, because obviously the platforms are now there. And the platforms kind of had to become the way they are because we're in capitalism. Yeah. And there's the famous line: "It's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism," coming down from Mark Fisher, and actually Frederick Jameson first wrote it. So it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism. So anything we do is going to ultimately be co-opted if we're not vigilant. I mean, there are processes in life that are not totally beholden to capitalism, for sure. But generally, anything you do on a sustained level, I suppose outside the familial and friendship space, outside, complete selflessness that exists in some industries, some sectors, perhaps like nursing or something of that nature. But aside from these pockets, anything we do going to become, very quickly co-opted by capitalism, and we're going to be helpless against that. But I think if we're really vigilant and we gather together and we think through this, there are ways of using the internet, for building community. And of course, one has to resist the lure for ever more fame and more money. And I find the more money easy to resist. Beyond, if you've got beyond, a certain amount of an income, a stable income, you can kind of turn your attention to other things. So I happen to have a university job, so I'm very fortunate. I didn't have stable work for years, so I can kind of resist the desire to make money off Patreon, etc. But it's very hard to resist the need for attention from people. Right. And I can really see that. I think the thing is that even when you're trying to resist that, when you're trying to do your own thing, and really be sincere about what you're producing, there's a tendency to kind of look over your shoulder, so to speak, and to look out to see if people are watching you being humble. So it's that kind of contradiction that almost it's like, on my path to enlightenment, are people going to look at me and say, now there's an enlightened man, and obviously that's not what you're supposed to be thinking when you're going through that.
That's right. And so the addiction to this fame is yet another part of this addiction. A quote that you have in the book, it's not completely related to what we're talking now. Well, kind of everything is related. But what I really like, what you put in there, I'm changing the trajectory of the conversation slightly, because Erich Fromm, who I hold in very high regard, German psychologist, psychoanalyst, fled the Nazis, just a fantastic thinker, writer of many books, most famously The Art of Loving. And this quote, you quote him in the book about specifically so that the social stigma of alcoholism and drugs versus other addictions. And I want you to talk a little bit about that, because as you suggest, and I completely agree, is that everybody in this digital capitalist age is addicted, but some addictions are there's a lot of stigma and others are completely accepted. So as an example, the executive in the train going home from their high pressure executive job, playing Candy Crush on the iPad for 45 minutes, to me is worse than the guy in the corner drinking a beer, quite frankly. But anyway, here's the Erich Fromm quote. The consumer is the eternal suckling crying for the bottle. This is obvious in pathological phenomena such as alcoholism and drug addiction. We apparently single out both these addictions because their effects interfere with the addicted person's social obligations. Here, that's the key. Compulsive smoking is not thus censored because, while not less of an addiction, it does not interfere with the smoker's social functions, but possibly only with their lifespans. So obviously, Erich Fromm died in 1970. Now we have arguably we have a similar stigma with smokers. But talk a little bit about this sort of hierarchy of addiction, which I find so enraging, quite frankly. I mean, it's completely accepted. Today I took the train to downtown, and I saw one person read a book, and I saw everybody else swiping on their phones. Does that make me a judgmental elitist, Mike, that I find that sad? Because maybe they're reading Nietzsche or Shakespeare on their phones. Although why then would their thumb constantly twitch, right?
Yes, so I am here still. I mean, yeah, this is interesting. I mean, people can be so obnoxious, and also be so much, the idealized kind of individual outwardly. I mean, I really think that constant social media use can lead people to be really awful people, and you really see that in just, I mean, how outwardly, objectively attractive people are these days, and in a very false way, but we're easily tricked. I mean, makeup's been a thing for forever. So these people do look attractive, but they just doesn't seem to be much of a concern for other people. It's very much, just about the image, and again, just about getting the likes and the attention of a clique. I mean, the typical high school movie, which had like the popular few, girls at the high school, young women, who would behave like absolute shites to everyone else. You really feel that being more and more the way the world is structured. And of course it can be men as well, and you have the highly masculinized and conventionally attractive square-jawed bearded guy podcasters as well, so you have the male
square bearded podcaster. Oh my God, I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to make this additional point. When I mentioned people on the train with their phones, you're talking about sort of the meanness that comes out, through online interaction, which is very true. But I also mean just the mere sadness of having to numb the compulsion to numb yourself. I mean, I don't know what these people are doing on their phone. I heard a discussion today that there is. In Germany, there's only 25 million. This is a country of 80 million people. There's 25 million people buying books. That's incredibly sad to me. And so anyway, just throwing this out there. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think, okay, I'm talking a little bit about how these people manifest it, in their everyday lives. But I think it's a two-way thing. I mean, they kind of reach out into the social media space. But of course, that has an effect on the person in real space. So it's almost like the activity increases online and then it decreases in the real world. So you get these people becoming kind of objects. But and at the same time, you get this judgmentalism. So that's one form of addiction. That you would be highly online, and your kind of real life would wither away. And there are other addictions where people wither away as well. So maybe you have this highly engaged social life between 9 p.m. and 2 in the morning in the pub. If anyone can afford this, in Finland it's very expensive. But then you're a husk in the morning, and you don't want to see anybody. So that there's that as well. But then the Instagram model, male or female, or the male podcaster, or the very angry incel who's saying horrible things, over Twitter and trying to get people cancelled, or this general kind of hate culture. I mean, they all have a similar emptiness to the alcoholic or other forms of addicts of substances. But there's definitely a hierarchy in terms of what's considered useful to society. So an attractive visage, but doing nothing for society, is I think kind of up there at the top these days.
Yeah.
The community alcoholic who's probably actually does something socially for other people is probably considered, is very much looked down upon.
There's so many great comments here. I just want to say on YouTube, HHP Hemcast says, change the word the consumer with the word the enslaved. And Susworld says, books teach emotions, reasoning, compassion, and understanding. All the things that humanity is losing. And you talk a little bit about AI as well. That's actually one of my main concerns about it. I mean, there's a lot of concerns, but that's just one of them. So if we would remove all this gamification stuff and these incentive structures from social media, would that work then? Scrim here in the room says, if the media companies' incentive to monetize engagement were lessened, they'd stop optimizing for maximum engagement, which leads to these negative outcomes. So as you say, there is a different model, obviously, that we can envision, right? I
mean, there's no doubt a different model for sure. Although I don't really drive at creating that, or it's nothing I'm particularly, I don't claim to have any knowledge on how that would happen. I think my point is much more attitudinal. Like, how are we going to approach ourselves, living with ourselves, and confronting the conditions of nature, and then build community? And I think then our internet use would change. So I think there's such a massive task in terms of rethinking the way we think. Anything we build is gonna be subject to the kind of problems we have now. I mean, how would you get enough people to follow you over to a platform that encourage more reasonable behavior? And if we had reasonable behavior,
why do I have to have these people? And you're talking about this too, which I really like, because you said this earlier, and in the book it's very clear to me, at least that's my reading, that this is also this sort of false goal that is put into our minds. I mean, here the book club is fairly small. This is a small community. Second Life is full, and our real world, physical world surroundings is full of groups that are fairly small, but that are really tight knit. Or you can talk about music or some sort of small local artist. Maybe there's like 10 people come to the show. I mean, I, as a musician, have certainly played shows where there were more people on stage than in the audience, but it was still worthwhile. And it was very important. That's what we need to get back, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly that's what I say in the book. I mean, what I meant just then was, if we made more platforms, how would you get enough people to discard the old platforms and come on a better platform?
Right.
So as to
I gotcha. Yeah.
Around smaller communities. But yeah, in the book I say
that's the uphill battle. Yeah.
So I mean, exactly what I say evades me right now. It's right at the end of the book. There's an excursus, which is, by that I mean a kind of extra chapter. So it kind of feels like it pretty much comes to a conclusion, but quite bleakly. Then I have this kind of add-on, which has a more positive kind of addendum.
I have that right here. Actually, I pulled it and I put it on the slide projector here because I annotated it with, we do it in SL every day. You say adversariality could be replaced by cooperative creative pursuit. And you say streaming services, voice over IP, etc. However, these services often cope with the competitive nature of social media and video hosting services driven by algorithms and ingrained social attitudes. So my reading of this is basically get rid of the incentive structure, the algorithms, and boom, we're done. I mean, I'm not saying that that's easy, but that's the key, no?
Well, the thing is, we're so oriented around debate culture now, and a very Americanized kind of debate culture, because in American universities there's this kind of culture of competitive debate.
Good point.
It goes hand in hand with the sports culture there, and that's kind of tipped over into leftist YouTube, and it's become a massive thing. So it's all debate, and you've got people who are smart who debate, and you've got people who aren't even that smart but have good skills at getting other people to shut up and just override them, who are very pushy, who've become very big, like this Destiny, and I don't even know this other massive guy. Anyway, there's a few. It's all guys, really. There's a few guys doing it, who are some smart and some less smart. But it didn't have to be that way. If you think about debate culture going back, and you think about like Plato's Symposium, or generally how Plato writes when he has several different interlocutors who are, they're discussing over an evening, and there's a kind of sense of celebration as well, and entertainment. And it could be more carnivalesque like that. It could be more meandering. You have a whole evening. Somebody's drinking. Somebody's doing some LSD if they want. Somebody is drinking tea, and they should, also do that. And we talk, and it maybe doesn't reach a conclusion of we have solved everything.
Yeah. Yep. And we don't have a winner either. I mean, like you say. I mean, this is the very that debate culture that they teach. Yeah.
Right, there are many ways it could happen, and the online community, online platforms allow for, because you have now in your Twitch, YouTube, whatever streaming, you have people talking in the comments section. I mean, there are ways of bringing them in onto the main talk as well, where you can have a call with 20, 30 people, and people do this. They, people open the chat to much more people who aren't famous, but it doesn't happen enough. and it's not enough. It doesn't go enough off on a tangent, so that it could end anywhere. If it happens, it normally happens, and then you end with the same, the same people being dominant and getting the credit. So, I mean, we can take this in all kinds of directions, but yeah, I think maybe it just has to happen in the sense of people literally doing that, and like you say, it happens in Second Life. And of course, when you're doing it, you shouldn't be looking around to go, well, I'm doing it now, and how famous am I getting from doing this?
Exactly. Look at me. Where's my cookie for me for that I get as a reward for doing it? That's right.
So stop doing it. The whole point is to stop that mentality, and like I said before, it is very difficult to do, but I think very necessary.
We have a good debate here in the local chat because Scrim says unions. The answer to essentially everything is unions because they're the answer to the problem, which is always capitalism, says Scrim. And then Gypsy says Gypsy runs from Scrim and unions. So we got a healthy debate right now in the local chat. So anyway, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think it really is a letting go of ego. It's not going to happen if people don't let go of ego. I mean, of course, it does happen in the real world all the time. There are communities where people do things for genuine reasons. It's just unfortunate that a number of prominent people engaged in spiritual type practices online, and you said that it's interesting that I kind of look at spirituality and I don't completely kind of disregard it, and I think it certainly has something to offer for the left wing and for people in general. I mean, it doesn't have to be just for left wing people.
Yeah.
But also the left wing. These things when they get online, they take on characteristics which are really contradictory and hypocritical.
Well, there's also this arrogance that we discussed, and I mean, Michael Brooks, who I hold in high regard, he was one of those people who was stressing that there is a place for spirituality in left wing circles, and he was also kind of pushing against a kind of an arrogance of some. But I want to briefly talk about. I want to throw in my Adorno real quick, because Adorno is someone that I very much respect. You mentioned earlier, we talked about Nietzsche. Nietzsche is controversial. I respect Nietzsche. I respect Adorno. Apparently, Adorno is also now outdated, Mike. I heard from the left tube people. But I think Theodor Adorno, and there's actually we got a bunch of Adorno memes around too. But Adorno was an important part of the Frankfurt School group, philosopher, musicologist, and he famously said that something we need basically, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but we need something he used the term shudder us out of the complacency of sort of the garbage that we're consuming that is produced by the culture industry. And the culture industry he defined as basically, to simplify it, Hollywood, big mainstream, today would be big mainstream movies or Netflix shows or whatever. And he advocated to really get in touch with who we are and what the world is. We need to stop consuming that, and we need to get something, for example, dissonant music. He was a big fan of Arnold Schoenberg, who invented the 12-tone technique, and famously he didn't really like jazz, which is I can forgive him. I mean, it was at the time he associated that with popular music, I guess. But talk a little bit about the relevance of Adorno's thought, specifically about resisting these products of the culture industry, because that's another thing that we why are we consuming this stuff online? I mean, the amazing thing about the internet is that we could consume or engage with products or content. I hate the word content. With artistic output that is not made by the culture industry. We could get exposed to it. I mean, much like you said before, much easier than in the days when we had to Xerox a little zine.
Yeah, I mean, Adorno, he spoke of this shudder that you said earlier, a shudder being a kind of shock. I mean, I guess everyone follows English, so you know what a shudder is, but a shudder is like a kind of a shiver, a physical reaction to a shock. And what he basically intended was that this kind of moment.
Mike, sorry, I have to interrupt you. This is insane, and I didn't plan this, but there is a cat with the name Theodore V. Adorno floating up above in front of the slide. This is shuddering me out of the complacency right now. Please continue and explain what he means by the shudder.
The shudder.
Oh my God.
Okay, hang on. So the shudder is basically where there is where Adorno basically says that we consider ourselves too much, in a binary kind of way, as we are individual subjects, and the world outside us, nature, etc. Everything beyond us would be an object. So for me, I am the individual seeing, being, existing thing. Everything outside me is into a sense unreal, but more to the point, what he was saying was that it is a threat. Okay, so humans proceed through life with everything being a threat that they must somehow tame, and the whole of nature itself is kind of like the major threat. Also, because it's going to cause our death. That's a natural process. However we die, it's going to be nature doing that. So humanity has proceeded throughout history of trying to subjugate nature by subjugating actual nature, building things and taming animals and killing animals and eating them and whatnot, but also by actually controlling each other. Okay, so what Adorno says is that there's a moment when listening to abstract art, or by looking at abstract art or listening to music, which is the most abstract form of art, there's a moment where we lose our temporary kind of false binary way of living, and we kind of meld into the object. So you're looking at, say, an abstract painting, although he didn't reference painting really, but I think it's easy to think about, say, Mark Rothko in this sense. If you look at a large scale Rothko, you kind of blend into it, your eyes kind of get absorbed in it, and the edges diffuse, and that becomes your reality, and you're no longer conscious of yourself as opposed to the painting or your environment around you. And I think it's even easier to imagine with classical music.
Or you listen to Morton Feldman's Rothko Chapel, by the way, which is amazing. Yeah.
I find, actually, Adorno talks about Gustav Mahler a lot, and I find Mahler really example in this sense. But also Pink Floyd for people who are not really into classical music, or the Orbital if you're more into dance music.
But Adorno would have hated them, and you use a great example. You talk about the Beatles' White Album. So why did Adorno reject popular music, to use a broad term? Why did it not function for him with the shudder? Why didn't they have the shudder effect?
It's what Adorno says, but I mean, whether he should have. I mean, I think he why wouldn't he see the shudder happening in some Pink Floyd songs? But I mean, he certainly never got to Pink Floyd, although they were operating in his last years. He died in 1969. But talking about the Beatles, rather, which is quite different from talking about Pink Floyd, really, if you think about it. So talking about the Beatles, he basically said they were kind of a distorted, cheapened version of dissonance. He could kind of get the dissonance there, but it already happened in more advanced forms with as you said earlier, Schoenberg, and
Schoenberg, who negated the tonal center of where classical music at the time in the 1920s, everything had a tonal center, and then Schoenberg says, no, I'm going to just completely upend that, and I'm going to give every single tone on the chromatic scale equal weight. And that was certainly shuddering all sorts of people out of their minds.
Yeah. But just his use of dissonance, because the 12-tone system can be hard for people to grasp, but there's this sense of dissonance, which is just kind of very jarring sound.
Well, that's what
And
my
that
dad says today. Every time I meet my dad, I'm going out to the suburbs to help out, and he last time he said to me, like out of the blue, he said, I never understood why you like that music. That is so dissonant and so scratchy, and I don't understand how you can listen to that. And I tried to explain what my appreciation for contemporary classical music, and then he would invariably say like, yeah, but it's terrible. It gives you all these strange feelings. You don't feel good when you listen to it. And it's very honest.
For sure, yeah. I mean, not everyone's is gonna appreciate it the same. I think with
No, but that's also the purpose, because to him the purpose of listening to this is not to be reminded. Again, we're going back to what you said earlier. It's not to be reminded of, or what Adorno says, to be sort of shuttered out of that role and realize, the holistic. I don't know. I can't really articulate it, but the difference here is that to my dad, the role of music is a very different one. It's more like, if I want to be cynical, it's more like the numbing. Exactly what we're talking about here, having some sort of nice buzz.
yeah, for sure. I mean, I think Adorno basically was saw the Beatles as a degraded form of what was already happening. So what could be found, it could be found in classical music, but better. But Adorno, his very specific tastes. He's one person, and I don't think we can take everything he says, as gospel, so to speak.
Oh, no. I'm not criticizing. I think maybe I put this wrong. I'm not criticizing Adorno at all. I'm somewhere else right now, Mike. I'm just saying that what I find so fascinating is that my dad is exactly what Adorno is suggesting. This could make your life more, better, because you're realizing more about, the nature of life or whatever. Someone like my dad would say, like, yeah, I don't even want that. And again, this falls back into an addiction of sorts, where there are substances. So, I could say my dad is using, the classical hits that they play on commercial classical radio as sort of this, sort of to numb sort of these questions that are in his head, that are questioning his existence and all this sort of existential stuff.
I mean, absolutely, yeah. But I think this is a tricky thing with Adorno. Is to what degree was he looking at universalism, or what degree was he looking for something that could be expanded, to suit everybody? And then that question kind of becomes redundant when what you're finding through that experience, or what he's finding through that experience, is a loss of the edges of the self, a loss of the binary between yourself and the world outside.
Yeah.
So that the individual experiencing it does, in a sense, become part of everything.
And again,
So,
that's what we said in the beginning. What you said in the beginning. That's the scary part. That's the same of maybe taking shrooms or whatever. No, isn't that kind of a little bit of that scary ego death potentially?
Not going to solve everything. And what I say there is that you can take your mushrooms and you can have your experience of it, of the eternal, and your experience of being connected to everything. But then come Monday morning, you still have your shift at McDonald's at 7 a.m. on the toilet shift. You have to do the cleaning of the loos, so. Or whatever, you're going back to teach at university, or whatever position you're in.
Or you prepare for a Second Life book club. No, absolutely. I agree 100%. Exactly.
The answer is not there. And the answer is not. It's exemplary, that you have that experience for a moment listening to music, or in meditation, and it's a similar thing. I mean, I think it's quasi-spiritual, and Adorno is written off as this kind of romantic quasi-spiritual thinker, and he wouldn't like that at all. But that's sometimes what's said of him.
Yeah.
And I can see a parallel between spiritual experience and what Adorno is talking about. And none of these things are going to solve anything in the long term. And of course, I think it's really nice to think, of this loss in the eternal you become part of all things, therefore you can't die. But that's not really that's not really what's happening there, because that's only a moment that exists within your wider lifespan. And the thing that you are that's experiencing that kind of loss of self will itself one day cease to exist. So I think we have to be careful of trying to find I will say the word sucker, but I don't know how much it's not used internationally, or people wouldn't know what I mean. But trying to find, some kind of saccharine sweet exit from fate. So I don't know what we're really left with then. And I think these are important questions. It's important to really, go through these kind of discussions. But of course, with debate culture, this wouldn't work, because it would be like, well, what's your point? Because you're not offering a solution. I'm not offering a solution.
Yeah.
But there isn't really a solution.
That's what's so frustrating, Mike. You're not offering solutions, for Christ's sake. That's what we need. We need closure, Mike. We need closure.
Yeah. I mean, when the closure then is, well, this is where I come up with this, but it's a little bit complicated, actually, for the very end. But there's this kind of socialism or death.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Or however you say it in Spanish, I would say it in Spanish now, but I don't want to embarrass myself. But it's famous in Spanish. Unless you see it written, there's socialismo o muerta. However you say this, I can't roll my R's.
Socialismo, maybe. Do we have a Spanish-speaking person in the audience?
Socialismo, yeah. I know what it is, but I can't say it. I can spell it for you. I'm not going to do that, because it's not going to work on spelling. Is not going to work. Medium. But yeah, it's socialism or death, but you see it written in Spanish because it's associated with Che Guevara, but it's associated with many Spanish speaking people. So and it's you can see the point, socialism or death, but then you're still beholden to trying to avoid death. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
But it's actually, what it really means is, so I want socialism, or if I'm not going to get socialism, I'm going to die, because I would rather be dead than have socialism. But it's still this kind of binary. So I say what we really need to have is a socialism and or death.
Yeah.
So the and death means you accept the death, but within our life, what we want is to avoid the death of capitalism, the capitalist-induced death of losing even the life that you have. So it's a socialism and death. But at the same time, we are recognizing that we actually do want to achieve socialism as well. And it is socialism socialism and death. It's socialism that accepts the inevitable death, but opposed to the capitalist death. So that's where the or comes in. Anyway, you have to see it written down and think about it.
Well, we have it here in English on the board. I don't have it in. I didn't prepare it in Spanish. Shyla, you wanted to chime in. Shyla, chime in quickly.
Yeah, I just want to ask a couple of things about this idea of death, and the idea that we can persist, right, which is not true. But someone brought up that we would have a fear, like if we accepted death, then we could be manipulated through fear that death is coming. But I really feel like today I'm manipulated because death might come if I don't take this pharmaceutical, or death might come if I don't do this or that. And so I buy things, right, to avoid death, because that's my ultimate orientation. Is that correct? And then things like, retirement, Drax, you and I talked about this. How we're told we'll have a great life in retirement. But by the time we reach retirement here in the United States, a lot of people no longer have bodies that are capable of doing the things that commercials tell us we'll be able to do.
Well, because they didn't meditate enough, Shyla. They didn't meditate. They eat the good food.
Yes. So is that this whole thing about, it's not about not necessarily acknowledging death, it's about avoiding it, right?
I guess that's what we've been talking about for the last hour, yeah.
Right. But it's about avoiding it. I think that, I know death has to come, but as long as I don't think about it, it won't come. And my father is very different in this regard. He's preparing, he's cleaning up the house, he's very aware. and he's spending his life in the way he enjoys. He goes hiking and things like this a lot. So, so I admire him for that. But I have to admit, I don't always. I'm aware of it, but I don't like thinking about it.
I mean, I don't like the idea. I'm not in any sense. I haven't in any sense resolved these things. This issue, which doesn't go away. But I think I understood it better and resolved it to some degree in the writing of the book. And of course, one doesn't write a book on this subject if they've resolved it, because if they've resolved it, then they're doing something else entirely. I just think that as a society, we would do well to really look at our relationship to the conditions of our existence again, and maybe points in history we've been more cognizant of that, but we've been allowed to escape thinking about these things in the West in recent decades. So yeah, I mean, I would just say that we're not going to really have a healthy relationship with nature and each other if we don't face the inevitability of death. And there's so many ways now of avoiding this also, because there's always this kind of thing on the horizon of, won't AI just solve it all and download us all into computers?
And as a matter of fact, I'm just reading, because I didn't get to, I just sorry to cut you off, but Bram E. Gieben, or Gieben, I hope I pronounced this correctly. Bram Gieben has a book on Revol Press called The Darkest Timeline that you also sent me, advanced review copy. The Darkest Timeline, Living in a World with No Future, and one of the essays in there is about transhumanism. So this is very apropos. So the techies have the solution, Mike. We don't, but they do.
Very good on this stuff. So I just want to say quickly that I set up Revol Press, which is the publisher that I'm publishing Bram's book with in June and my book in September. Then we have books from a number of other people, including Derek Varn, One Dime, aka Tony Chamas, or actually his real name is Tony Chamas, aka One Dime, who's a YouTuber who makes very impressive documentaries about philosophy and politics. And we have Adam Turl, who runs a great hard copy kind of almost cut and paste fanzine style publication on the arts and politics called Locust Review. So we have a few more coming up as well. Dan Malo, the co-owner of the co-founder of Revol Press, will have a book out at some point. Dan Malo is an immigration lawyer, and wrote a great book on immigration called Borderlines, which came out with Zero Books. But anyway, we've got a number of great books coming out, but we really set up to give a better deal for writers, because we know quite a lot about the kind of raw deal that writers get, because me and Dan have both published before. And we give actually, and I'm sure of this because I've looked at this again and I've looked at other contracts that people offer, we give the best royalties, in the business in terms of this kind of popular end philosophy, popular critical theory. And we actually give not only great royalties, but we give each author 5% of every other author's book, which to my knowledge is awesome. An innovation, because we're all in this together. If somebody else's book just takes off, then you're going to do well as well. And yeah, so Bram's book's coming out soon. That's great. And that's really on, the darkest timeline, that this idea that our timeline is the bleakest one possible, and that we are heading towards doom. But it gives a great kind of sense of positivity within that. So it's more about, well, how are we going to confront that, and how are we going to deal, how are we going to kind of line up our ducks, in a sense, as we would say, or how are we going to get things in order, and how are we going to deal with who we are, in these last decades or centuries, or however long we have. Now, I just want to say that one great asset we've had is a few brilliant artists on board that helped design the website. Vladan Jeremic and Raina Radel did the illustrations on the website, but also we had a guy called Valtteri Harakka who did the kind of book templates, and the book illustrator who did the front illustrations for The Darkest Timeline and Hungry Ghost in the Machine. is a guy that works under the name Dada International Unlimited.
He is
So
in
Dada,
the YouTube chat under FMF Corn, but that's and the covers are really great. This is one of my pet peeves, quite honestly, Mike. That the cover makes a huge difference, and you already with these two covers, the others are coming soon. But I think these covers are fantastic, no doubt
yeah, I mean,
about it.
I think we don't think about that. How many of the books we really love historically, we associate them with their covers.
Yeah, absolutely.
One should not judge a book by its cover, and
One
I would
should
definitely say
a
that
little bit.
one shouldn't, but it helps if you have the right artist on board. Well, we'll see how people receive it, but yeah, I mean, I think you need to. You should be giving credit to everyone involved, and we have a good team. So yeah, I just wanted to say that. But anyhow, I really look forward to seeing how people receive these books, and I really thank you for engaging with mine. It makes me want to get it out now. But
Yeah,
still
you
not
have
out.
to. Yeah, like how can we wait that long? And wait a minute, I know how we can wait that long because I read in your book. I'm reading this quote here. I put it up on the board. Some TikTok users claim to have shifted reality during their sleep for as long as several years before returning to this dimension as they awake, often bitterly disappointed at having returned to the same spot they had been only hours before they woke. Sorry to change the subject like that, but we have to wait until September until your book comes out. In the last few minutes, please tell me that this is not true. Is there like a TikTok trend with this shifted reality thing? God, I'm old. What is that?
Isn't it called reality shifting? Isn't
So
that
they go to a different dimension, or what? Where are they going?
I believe that well, you can make any reality is possible because there's infinite dimensions. Is their kind of that's the folklore behind it for them.
Right.
And so a lot of goes to Harry Potter's whatever it's, I forget the name now. It must be in my book if I've written about that. They go to the Harry Potter world, the Harry Potter school, and then they really live in it, and that's real. And then they wake up and they're like, "Damn, I was away for 7 years and I come back," and it's almost as if they just went to sleep and dreamed, which are called, that's
Which they probably
no
did.
doubt. We did, yeah. But to them, it's like, no, this is terrible. Why did it end? But I mean, the thing is with books, this is whole thing where you have to. There's this quite long timeline, because you have to promo and all of this nonsense. And then summers are terrible times for releasing books. You shouldn't release them in July or August because half of Europe is away. Not, they go on their holidays.
Wait a minute, Sugar here in the there's a lot of interesting comments, and I'm feeling like I'm totally out of the loop. Sugar says he completely believes in reality shifting. Sugar, elaborate in the local chat, please. But go on, Mike. Yeah, you had to make a decision when to publish, and then you decided on after the summer, basically.
So we go with Bram first in June. So June's still good, but July, August is kind of out.
Yeah.
So I'm publishing in September. So we have a long time. Yeah, unfortunately, sorry for that, people. But please do hang on, and hopefully, Draxtor, you can help get the word out when it comes out.
We'll do another one. We'll have you special, and maybe people can go to the website right now and sign up for a newsletter or something.
I actually do this, but I said it before. But I think I'm going to start doing this more, coming on here and broadcasting from here myself for a Revol Press YouTube channel, so we can maybe keep it going like that.
This is your space, man. You can go in here, and you will have we have 1,500 people in the book club group, and you can have lectures or conversations. You can open the floor, which I don't because I'm an authoritarian type of book club host. Gypsy, thank you for coming. Gypsy got to run. Thank you, and I apologize for not putting up the comments. Wonderful conversations in the group. Shyla, this is not the right website. Please, it's revolpress.com, but it's also on the book club calendar. Revolpress.com is the website. So we're gonna wrap it. We didn't get to the Barbenheimer. Well, maybe last word for old people like me, Mike, because we're talking about posting and about expressing oneself creatively. What is this with the Barbenheimer meme? What function does it serve? I'm not sure how to feel about it. On the one hand, it's creative, but on the other hand, again, is exactly what we're talking about, which is keeping us in the loop of posting, of creating content for the machine, and running away from really dealing with what we should be dealing with. So, is this fun? Is this a little fun, a little dopamine hit? There's nothing wrong with it. Or is that really, I don't know, just playing into the plan of capitalism? We lost Mike. He doesn't know. But I'll tell you because I'm an elitist and I'll tell you it's the end. It is the end. Look at these memes. I don't know. Listen to Schoenberg, people, please, or build something in Second Life, and don't waste your time with memes. Play Candy Crush instead of memeing.
I think you're right, Roxy. I think there's going to be a series.
A series of what?
The Barbie. We're not going to see the end of these memes.
No, I mean, people. I'm not hiding behind my elitism where I say, if you want to really engage with these, and that's where I agree with Mike. You need to. You can't outpost yourself out of your predicament, out of your human predicament. I think you're better off in engaging deeply with literature, music, and other things. But I think we lost Mike, and we're out of time anyhow. So let me run through the end credits. Thank you, Mike Watson of Revol Press, brand new Revol Press, and
Yes, I think.
sorry, Mike. Now I'm gonna be brutal. I'm gonna be Adorno-ish. I'm gonna pretend that you exposed your breasts, and I'm Adorno, and I'm running out screaming. An obscure reference. Nobody knows what I'm talking about. But Mike Watson, the website is Revol Press, and his book is Hungry Ghosts in the Machine, and Bram Gibbons' book is The Darkest Timeline. There's a bunch of other books already announced on the website. If you like the book club, if you like the programming and the community that we provide here, please consider making a donation via Ko-fi, kofi.com/Draxtor. You can also send a super chat, although I prefer, frankly, Ko-fi because a YouTube super chat, I think they take like 40% or something like that. If you have loose Linden dollars in your pocket, please put it here in the tip jar. The tip jar is right behind me, this wonderful dragon. Now, I've been talking about Infinite Jest, and next Wednesday, I have decided to add, again, I'm going back and forth with this. I've added a new format, the What Are You Reading format, and it's at 10 a.m. Second Life time. And I'm going to open the floor and we're going to have a conversation. We're going to use voice. This is all about the conversation, not so much a presentation, unless if nobody shows up, then I will present. And this is about Infinite Jest. This is the Infinite Jest edition of our new format, What Are You Reading? It's next Wednesday, April 10th at 10 a.m. SLT. If you haven't read Infinite Jest, if you plan on never reading it, if you're reading it right now and if you're not finished, if you tried it 5 times and never finished it, you can still show up. It's going to be nourishing and rewarding for you. I guarantee you that. Okay? But be advised, it's at 10 a.m. SLT. It's not at 12. Okay? So the calendar that is linked in the group has all those dates. And the YouTube channel should already have that after this show ends. Again, very impressed with Mike's work and really cool that he's putting up this venture. That's it, folks. You can hang out. Maybe go to Jerry's Galleria Rustica. I don't know if Jerry is still in the audience. Here he is. Jerry put up the link, and people can still hang out in SL. People know that I go to bed early, so I'm gonna head out. But that's it. Thank you all for coming, and goodbye.
say? Let's close the door on the past. So we swim, and it is in so many ways just a little trick to keep our heads above water. But now I'm not afraid anymore. Life, oh life, there's nothing to fear from you. Life, let me know if I can be of any help. Life, you and I, let's try a fresh start today. What do you say? Let's close the door on the past. Oh life, there's nothing to fear from your life. Let me know if I can be of any help. Life, you and I, let's try